Guys, so much for coming out on this lovely Wednesday evening. I know you could be enjoying some really awesome barbecue, but you are here to give us a lot of feedback. So thank you very much, Todd. Let me introduce myself. My name is Heather Hamilton. I am on the select board for the town of Brookline, and we have the only pilot program in the Commonwealth regarding these electric scooters. They are operational in other parts of the country, but they're only operational right here in Brookline for Massachusetts. So lots of challenges when you're the first and you are learning as you go. So I just wanted to hear back from the community about what's working, what's not working, things that we can address before the pilot ends so that we can see whether or not we want to continue this program after the pilot ends. So let me introduce the rest of the team. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Dempsey. I'm the chair of the Brookline Transportation Board, and I'm also a town meeting member in Precinct 6. The Transportation Board is appointed by the Select Board, and we essentially regulate any space from curb to curb in Brookline. So we're responsible for where are there parking spots, what are the parking regulations, what are the speed limits, where are there raised crosswalks versus flat crosswalks versus bike lanes versus bicycle parking. Anything that happens from curb to curb that involves pedestrians or cyclists or motor vehicles or e-scooters falls under our purview at some point. And we're glad to be working with the Select Board on this pilot, and especially glad to be hearing from you tonight to get your feedback and your input on how the pilot is going and how it can be improved.
My name is Todd Corrine. I'm the Transportation Administrator for the town of Brookline. My office provides staff to the Transportation Board, the Select Board, and others within Town Hall with issues regarding transportation and engineering.
Good evening. My name is Sergeant John Canny. I'm with the Traffic Division of the Brookline Police Department and supervise Traffic Division during the day.
And then we have the two companies that have been licensed to operate, Hannah Smith from Bird, and then Scott Mullen from Lime. So we'll do our best to answer questions, but tonight is really about getting feedback from you guys. So let me just kind of do ground rules. I've got quite a lot of people signed up, I think over 30. So I would ask that you keep your comments to under 5 minutes. I will be using a timer, and I will give you a polite warning of 1 minute. And then I will be a little harsher and say, please conclude. I won't say anything, but if you do go over, I will. 5 minutes apiece. So let me start by calling up the first person, and then what I'll do is I'll try to give a heads up to the next person so that you can get closer to the podium. Please introduce yourself, your name, and you can feel free to give your address. If you don't feel comfortable providing your address, you can, do whatever self-identification you want to let us know. Okay, let's start with David Trevette and Pat Allen Etienne. He will be next.
So, actually, before you get started, I just wanted to let you know that we are taping this for our own records, and Big TV is also filming this as well, so we have a record of everything. If you did not sign up yet to speak and you want to, there's more sign-up forms as you came in the door. We'll be getting those throughout the time.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. Okay.
Hi.
Take it away, David.
My name is David Trevette. I live at 177 Babcock Street, Unit 1. I happen to be the chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but tonight I'm speaking for myself as a resident, partly because my feelings and thoughts about this issue have changed since the last time the Pedestrian Advisory Committee considered this issue and since the pilot started. So what I want to do tonight is provide my sort of updated thinking about the issue of scooters on sidewalks. In an ideal world, Brookline would have separated bike lanes separated, protected bike lanes, and that's where the e-scooters would ride as long with the bicycles and other micromobility. However, we don't have that infrastructure, and it's not going to be a quick thing to get to it. So we have to address what do we do now about the e-scooter issues. There have been a lot of complaints, and certainly one thing that the town might decide to do is to ban them altogether. But right now, I'm going to assume, because if they don't ban them altogether, we've got to figure out how to manage them and what we want to do about them. And if we did ban them, that would presumably also potentially be telling private citizens that they're not allowed to buy their own private e-scooters and operate them in Brookline. So let's, for the moment, assume that there will be e-scooters. We have to do something. Along that discussion, I want to keep several things in mind. E-scooters are a problem that we need to deal with. There have been a lot of complaints, but they're not the end of the world. Automobiles, on the other hand, do far more damage. They kill to our environment. They kill more people. And so what we want to do is try to achieve some balance of the different modes of transit in the town of Brookline. Second, let's remember that when e-scooters were first rolled out, here's suddenly this brand new thing, and they were everywhere in town. And so a lot of people wanted to try them out. And they were all beginners. They were beginners in using scooters. And so it's not surprising that they felt safer on the sidewalks than in the streets. One encouraging sign I've seen from my own observation is that the ratio of people using scooters on streets as opposed to sidewalks has increased. I see more and more on the streets and fewer on the sidewalks. That doesn't mean there are none on the sidewalks. We don't have to think about it, but at least the trend is in the right direction. I mean, we might even think about trying to encourage initial e-scooter users to pick up their first scooter ride far away from congested areas. Maybe try it out in a parking lot, get comfortable, then take it out in the streets. A third thing is that I would think we should be careful about promoting unenforceable restrictions. I think that to have a town-wide ban on e-scooters, which is what's in the contract now and would clearly scooters on sidewalks, and clearly a lot of scooter riders are still ignoring, I think that's not very enforceable. We would have to station police officers all throughout town at all sorts of intersections and streets, and I think that would take vastly more resources that we might be comfortable investing in this issue. So what do I think we should be doing? After thinking about this, I would like to understand why we should treat e-scooters any different from bicycles. Today, bicycles are allowed to ride on sidewalks outside of commercial districts. They are forbidden from being on the sidewalks in the commercial districts. Furthermore, when they're on the sidewalks, even outside of the commercial districts, they're supposed to proceed at a walking pace. They're supposed to make a sound if they overtake someone who's else using the public way. So I would like to think that we could treat e-scooters the same as bicycles. We could allow them to use the sidewalks in less dense areas, keep them off the sidewalks in the congested areas. To me, focusing this restriction on those densely populated and heavily trafficked commercial areas would allow the police to focus their attention on that area, those areas that would allow enforcement without the same incredible boost of resources that would be needed to enforce it town-wide. So, and I frankly would also personally like to expand the not on sidewalk restriction that bicycles, and then if this were adopted also e-scooters have, to areas with vulnerable populations. And the things that come to mind are senior housing, schools with young children, senior center. There are other areas where there are vulnerable populations. So, and in having this discussion, let's remember that when I'm saying let's allow them on sidewalks, that doesn't mean allowing them to proceed to operate irresponsibly. What they want to do is we need to have them go slow, be under control, and properly make a sound when they're overtaking something in the public way. So that's my current thinking. I'm happy to listen and hear what other people have to say, and I'd love to consider this further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Pat? Hello.
Hopefully I'll only be here a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I'm not used to speaking in public, and I'm nervous.
Okay. I think it's a friendly crowd.
Okay, great. The one thing I have to say, I've been reading a lot about this, and I'm finding the more I read, the more I'm not optimistic. So I just made just a quick list of the pluses and the minuses. And it's not red, I just say the pluses, as for now, there's fun for scooter riders. And I think the town gets revenue. But I'm not sure they're going to reduce the carbon footprint or even reduce car usage. And I also think they could reduce bicycle usage and walking thing. So that's first. These are just bullet points. I think, number one, there will be increased costs for police to monitor. Other things won't get done by police, and all of our citizens will be affected by that increased cost. I think there's going to be more congestion in the bicycle lanes because those lanes are very narrow. I know in our Washington Street area, I think it's no more than 4 feet wide, and that's a problem. We're going to need additional space to be used to store the scooters, which is another problem. Also, I believe there's going to be decreased use of public transportation because the public, they use them now to go from their house to the public transportation, whereas before they would have probably walked or even taken a bicycle. Also, risk of injuries to riders. In the CDC Austin study, they found that 48% of the injuries were to the head. And they had something like 271 incidents in 3 months. And those are just the incidents that were reported. Also, increased liability to the town. I'm not quite sure what would that be. So, suits, various other things. People falling on the street that have potholes and so forth. So that's possible increase to the town. And I also noticed in the CDC study for Austin that a lot of people, because they're mainly young and good for them, but they found a lot of incidents of drinking while driving and speeding while driving, and also using phones or listening to podcasts. I'm almost finished. Also in the CDC study, they said that they found a lot of malfunction of scooters. So that would be another issue. Also, the electronic tutorial, they found that most of the people who looked at it, especially the young people, they just skimmed it over. They just did it right. And also, I think with the scooters, it's going to be more difficult for bicycle riders to ride. They're so narrow. And I think it would be difficult to combine them both on the same one. And also, there are also studies that suggest that the scooters may or may not be computer environmentally friendly. They're estimated to have the most 2-year lifespan. And so after 2 years, some say 6 months, but they would end up in landfill at the end of the short life cycle. And the more popular they are, the more waste they will create. So that's one thing. And most of the information there comes from the vendors. The only thing that I could find out, other than articles from the New York Times or the CDC study, came in fact from the vendors who were marketing them. And I noticed that in New York alone, like in New York State, the companies combined spent at least $475,000 in lobbying for electric scooters. And that's in the first 4 months of 2019. And as mentioned in the previous meeting with you, Heather, as we wanted to know how you measure success, who has input into it, and who has input into determining it, and all areas of the town should be involved, not just the people who ride the scooters, also let's see, I told you I'm nervous.
Members of the public
the
that might be-
surveys, the post-survey should be given to most people because safety is a really, really big issue. So that's my main thing.
Okay.
That's all I have to
Pat,
say.
how do you pronounce your last name?
All in.
All in.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And then Paul Warren is up, and then after Paul is a Christopher Lucy. Okay. While we're getting ready, I just want to recognize another select board member that just walked in, Bernard Green, he's our current chair. And then Cindy Lee is also in the audience, and she is on our transportation board. Thank you for coming. Okay, Paul, sorry about that.
Good evening. My name is Paul Warren. I live on Carlton Street, right in the St. Mary's Business District, so we see a lot of activity over there. I'm also a Precinct 1 town meeting member. First, I want to thank you for doing the pilot, being innovative. I also want to thank you for creating the opportunity for the community to come and provide feedback. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
I sent an email out when this started to a pretty large group asking for feedback and also pointing out where they could give feedback to the town and also to each of the providers. Many of the constituents have contacted me. Each time they've contacted me, I've asked them to pass that on to your email address for feedback. And I will say that the issues have been constant and consistent. I suspect you're going to hear a lot of this tonight, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But the first is riding on sidewalks. There seems to be a lot of it, although I would agree with the first speaker that it seems to have declined a little bit, but there's still a lot of riding on sidewalks. I walk around with my 2-year-old son down Carlton Street and Beacon Street, and it's pretty scary when someone whizzes by you either from behind you or when I walk out of my gate and they're doing 15 miles an hour down the sidewalk. That's not a bike. There's a bike lane right there, and they're still going down the sidewalk. The scooters are blocking the sidewalks consistently. I've heard a lot from some of our elderly citizens that they're having a hard time navigating those, especially we have a few blind gentlemen that walk down Beacon Street together. I've seen them having to navigate the scooters that are in front of the Busy Bee from time to time, so it is a problem. Scooters are going against traffic. That's pretty scary to see them zipping down a one-way street against the flow of traffic when there's not the chevrons or a bike lane that's meant to go that way, especially if you're turning onto a one-way like Churchill, you're not expecting that they're going to be there. So to turn a corner and have a scooter coming at you pretty quickly is a little scary. There's clearly underage drivers. I don't know what the process is to keep a 14-year-old off a scooter, but whatever that process is, it's not working. The last thing clearly is there's no helmets. I don't know how you're ever going to enforce that, but I see a lot of scooters. And by the way, every scooter driver I see, it looks like they're having a good time. So they're not unhappy scooter drivers, but I don't think very, very rarely do they actually have a helmet. And by the way, all those 5 things I've witnessed personally, and have received a lot of emails. This is unusual, I also personally witnessed what I would assume was a Bird contractor, who I think they have contractors that pick up the scooters for recharging. This gentleman, there was 2 of them, they were doing donuts in the middle of St. Mary Street in front of the Brookline Arts Center, doing circles on the street and then on the sidewalk. It was a pretty dangerous situation. And I knew they were picking them up because they put 3 of them in the back of the hatchback. Now, I would assume that it was a contractor. It would be great if we could get the vendors to actually identify with some sort of placard, one of those magnetic placards on the side of the vehicles, so you know that it's a contractor, so that you could maybe contact the vendor if there's an issue. I was not comfortable approaching them and saying anything to them. It'd be helpful to have them be identified. And so that all doesn't sound negative. I had one restaurant operator in the St. Mary's district gush about the scooters. She loves the vibe about it. She thinks they're cool. It's a cheaper alternative form of transportation for her restaurant workers. And she was a huge fan, so I want to make sure that I mention that. But I have 3 questions, and I don't know if you're answering questions tonight, but the first is, who's enforcing the rules? Every periodically I see police officers pulling over cars. I see police officers pulling over bicycles. I've never, ever seen a scooter operator stopped by a police officer, ever. So I think enforcement is huge. It's going to be really important. I don't agree with the first speaker that we should just allow these things on sidewalks. They're heavy. And something going 15 miles an hour, I don't know how you're going to enforce a speed limit on a sidewalk. But if that thing hits you or a 2-year-old, it's not going to be very pretty. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I'd ask is, could each company please put a sign on and identify their vendors that are picking up the scooters. And then the last thing, echoing the second speaker, is a report going to be issued? What is the criteria for moving forward, and how will that decision be made? Thank you so much.
So Christopher Lucy? Okay. And then after Christopher is Margaret Beal, I believe is the name. And then John Harris after that.
Margaret, if you want to come up, if you don't mind standing behind Chris, we'll try to limit the time on the transitions because we're going to be here pretty late if we don't act efficiently like that. Thank you. Yep, we'll make sure we get that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, so I just want to say, I'll identify myself first. Christopher Lucy, and not a resident of Brookline, but a resident of Boston, but I have spoken on this issue at Cambridge as well. So broadly speaking, I am interested and supportive of alternative transportation modalities, and I do want to second what the gentleman said from the Pedestrian Advisory Council to your board. My feelings are very much in sympathy what he says. I don't think they belong on sidewalks. I absolutely think you should, wear a helmet. Probably not on a sidewalk in most circumstances. There might be some exceptions. There might be some off-road versions of these things coming around too. So there might be some reason to limit them in non-paved areas. But in general, I think that they would be very salutary to the transportation picture. And I'm not worried about them not getting recycled if they're third party. Or even if they're privately owned, I think people are going to have some real reason to recycle them once they've become obsolescent. You should definitely observe the traffic laws, and I'm sure that they're prone to most of the same infractions that you might find among bicyclists, and I don't see any reason why they cannot be compatible in the traffic stream with bicycles, but they do belong mostly in the street, and people will have to get used to the fact that they've never ridden anything else. A bicycle rides in the street, so it's vulnerable to the same traffic follies that any other vehicle is. I always say to myself, it's healthy till I get hit by a bus or a truck, and you have to be very careful to ride a bicycle here. Even the sidewalks are congested for walking, and I'm an avid walker, and I could use these as, some type of a addition to my transportation, scope, that I could go further. It would be more portable, it would be more convenient. There are some that fold. I might even be able to bring them on the T, because I haven't found a folder bicycle yet, and my bicycles are too nice to ride here, so I'm usually confined to a third-party bicycle as well. And I can't see any reason that a proper regulatory structure can be erected so that, other than cost, or the amount of labor involved, so that it's not one of Blackstone's nuisances and it can fit, into your community and not become a problem for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very difficult to hear the speakers. Agreed, yes.
Okay, speak into the mic.
Okay. My name is Margaret Beal. I'm a Brookline resident, and I'll be brief. I have a number of concerns, but I'm going to focus on two issues that relate to the dockless nature of the technology, because in my mind, that's the real issue, and I understand that it makes it attractive and probably quite profitable for the commercial companies. But to me, that's what makes them a degradation to our environment, both for pedestrians and for people using parks, and also a danger to anybody who has any kind of visual, even partial deficits. If there's anything worse than seeing a neon or a bunch of neon e-scooters abandoned in our Olmsted parks, it's the dark, invisible ones lying across 1/3 of the width of a dark asphalt path. They're really hard to see, and I'd like to know what our legal, setting aside the issue of moral responsibility towards citizens who are vulnerable in some way. I'd like to know what the legal responsibility is for the town and for the company for injuries sustained by pedestrians falling over these scooters, because I'm sure it's going to happen. I've seen some amusing sights, like small groups of teen and 20-something guys smoking dope in Olmsted Park and careening around at twilight. And I have to say, at the time I kind of chuckled, and then I thought about it later and didn't. But I've seen a lot of abandoned scooters on sidewalks near where I live and in the park, and it really concerns me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So John, and then Helen Leviton?
Thank you. My name is John Harris. I've lived in Brookline almost 30 years. Town meeting. Sorry? Yeah, sorry. John Harris, been in resident of Brookline for almost 30 years. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 8, and I'm co-chair of Climate Action Brookline, although just speaking privately for myself tonight. As a longtime environmentalist, I've been very disheartened by the lack of progress that we've made generally on climate change and actually environmental issues generally. But when I see people scooting down the street, my heart absolutely rises. Unfortunately, I see many more cars. There's only one person in most of the cars, and we know, data tells us, that almost half of car trips in the country are less than 3 miles long. I imagine it's a higher percentage in Brookline because everybody lives so close to downtown Boston, to Cambridge, et cetera, where a number of us work or go to school. And I imagine, what a great thing it would be if that one person in all those cars was on a scooter instead. How much cleaner our air would be, how much less road congestion there would be, how much less dangerous our roads would be. Road congestion, the people who were inconvenienced yesterday by the derailment, I'm actually in the market to buy a scooter that will fold up. I'll get on a subway car, and at the other end, or a derailment or whatever, I'll get off the car, I'll unfold my scooter, and just scoot to where I'm going. So excellent, that would be a great solution. Our objective should be, environmentally, to get people out of their cars and to get where they're going by walking, by public transportation, and by micromobility such as bikes, e-scooters, e-bikes, et cetera, et cetera. The scooter share program, in my view, is honestly the single best thing that the town of Brookline has done in the almost 30 years that I've been here. I think it's a phenomenal program. I have noticed that the e-scooter share riders are generally teens, 20-somethings, et cetera, early adopters, and for two reasons. First, because such people are familiar with apps and are early adopters of things, and because it's all stand-up models at this point. I strongly recommend that the scooter share companies offer seated models in addition with baskets for stuff. That way they'll get older and more cautious folks trying them out. E-scooters can be liberating, absolutely liberating for Brookline seniors. You can scoot to buy your groceries, go to the doctor, visit your friends, etc. Remind everybody that Brookline's goal is official goal, the town's goal is to be fossil fuel free by the year 2050, which means right away. And many people are saying we need to reach that goal by the year 2030, which means tomorrow. So basically, I propose that micromobility, scooters, bikes, etc., is the single easiest thing to implement. Matter of fact, we already have, because so many people already have bikes and are riding these scooters. And I'm just told today that apparently the new data says that there have been, since the scooter share program in town has started, there have been 50,000 rides from April 1 until today, I guess. So, sorry? Well, maybe we'll get clarification later on. But basically, I also propose that micromobility such as scooters is the biggest bang for the buck environmentally that we can do. It costs just a few bucks to rent an e-scooter, and it costs $300 to $500 per person to buy an e-scooter. Hugh Madison, many of us know, we've seen him $400 for his sit-upon e-scooter that he scoots around everywhere, and he'd love to take you all for to test it out. Transportation is 40% plus of Massachusetts' greenhouse gas emissions. And basically in Brookline, as a residential community, I would just tell everybody that cars and trucks, the average sedan right now weighs 2 tons, 4,000 pounds, and a huge percentage of those cars with just one person on it. If you estimate just $200 for the rider and your briefcase, your groceries, whatever, that means 80% of the fuel, the greenhouse gases, and the particular emissions are just to move the vehicle, not yet to move you.
John, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to have to, let's see. Conclusion first, then. Basically, I think many of the issues on liability, accountability, licenses, turn signals, et cetera, will need to be resolved at the state level. And I would hopefully push that the town of Brookline and environmentalists in town would push to get those resolved ASAP. I think the program should continue past November 15th because if only for one reason, which is the greenhouse gas emissions avoided, a huge solution for climate change. Environmentalists will soon realize micromodes are the easiest means of reaching our climate change goals because all it takes is a personal decision and a small investment. And the town will soon realize micromodes are the best bang for the buck environmentally. In conclusion, recommend that the pilot continue even past November 15th, that the companies offer seeded models, and that we implement complete streets rigorously, and that the town go further and design programs to actively encourage everyone to get out of their car whenever it makes sense and to try micromodes.
John.
Thank you.
If you're not able to get through your comments, you can also submit them in writing to us at escooter@brooklinema.gov. And Helen.
My name is Helen Levitin. I live at Longwood Towers. I have my own questions and comments from two other people. I actually think the scooters are accidents waiting to happen. People on them wear no helmets. They're on the sidewalks, and they go very fast. I have not heard, or do not know, do they have a horn to tell someone that they are approaching? Do both the scooter types have front and back lights? And does the scooter follow the rules of a bike or a car? Okay, I have another person's questions. Are you collecting demographics from the users, age particularly? And how are users who violate rules being held accountable? If there is an accident with injury or property damage, how is blame assessed and who pays? Okay, the third person's questions. What's the use of restrictions, helmets, age limits, no riding on sidewalks, if they can't be or are not enforced? This is a pilot. By what criteria do you define success? And on what basis do you decide whether to continue or discontinue the experiment? And there is some example. You want to encourage modes of transportation other than cars. This is a good thing. But if the mode increases the danger to pedestrians, which is bad, how do you weigh one against the other? And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Joyce Justwicki. And then after Joyce is Elaine Bacall?
I'm Joyce Justwicki, town meeting member from Precinct 9. I live on Winchester Street. I've lived there for 50 years. I bought my house so I could walk everywhere. In the 2 months I spent in Houston since I've retired, I put on more mileage on my car than I did in 2 years here. I can do everything I want except go to the beach on the T. With scooters on the sidewalk, in Houston, you cannot walk on the sidewalks. They are in such terrible disrepair. Our sidewalks are great. I can walk safely. I am now a senior citizen, so I do have to be a little more careful than I was 50 years ago. So what I am encountering on Winchester Street, which is a cut through from Coolidge Corner to Brighton, is scooters on the streets, no helmets, no safety gear, scooters on my sidewalks. We have families living there. When I see a 6-year-old on a scooter with his helmet and his elbow pads, it's adorable. When I see some teenagers zipping down past my house, it's not adorable. But the last straw for me, because we all are responsible for our own safety, the last straw is finding these scooters on my bushes, blocking my driveway, blocking the sidewalks that I moved to my house to be able to use. I've already given you my rant on bicycles a long time ago. If we make rules and people don't follow them, we have to find a way to punish them. And right now, there's not. If a cyclist runs me over and I end up in the hospital because I am 76, I am not as flexible as I used to be. I don't bounce back the way I used to. Who pays my bills? The company? The 18-year-old rider who probably doesn't even have tenant's insurance? Those questions have to be answered. And as far as I'm concerned, a sidewalk is for walking. Period. Not no scooters on the sidewalk in this neighborhood, but in this neighborhood it's okay. Sidewalks are for walking. And that is what we are trying to encourage, especially in North Brookline, especially in Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, Brookline Village. Everything we want is walkable. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a ridiculous, dangerous precedent. We don't need them. We're already dealing with cyclists who don't obey the law. Let's get rid of these.
Thank you. Elaine?
I'm Elaine Bacall. I live at 80 Park Street. I walk a lot all around Coolidge Corner and all of Brookline. And I also live on a street that is a shortcut from the high school. So I see kids coming from the high school on their scooters. They ride on the sidewalk on Washington Street, and then they want to come down Park Street. There isn't any room on Park Street. There's no real bicycle lane. So they either have to go on the sidewalk or they have to ride in a dangerous situation on Park Street, and they're endangering themselves and other people. My biggest complaint, though, is about the riders on the sidewalk, because I'm a senior citizen, all my friends are senior citizens, and we're all terrified of them. We've all had bad experiences. I've had one experience that wasn't even on the sidewalk. I was stepping off the sidewalk. I had a walk sign in front of the Bank of America to cross Beacon Street. Two guys came from behind me. I didn't even know they were there, and they whizzed in front of me. They had a red light, and they whizzed in front of me going right onto Beacon Street. They easily could have knocked me over, and I feel the same way as this woman who just spoke. I'm afraid of falling. I don't want to hit my head or break my hip, and all of my friends and everybody I know feels the same way. I have friends in their 70s, in their 80s. I have one friend who's 94 years old and uses a walker to walk up Beacon Street every day that she can, and she keeps telling me how afraid she is. She's seen kids riding down the sidewalk towards her, and she doesn't know what to do. She's very frail, but she wants to get out every day. So this is a big problem for senior citizens. We don't have wide streets in Brookline like they might have in Houston or Austin or someplace else. Our streets are fairly narrow. A lot of places the bike lanes disappear. When I drive down Beacon Street from Cleveland Circle, there's a bike lane, and then the bike lane disappears, and the bikes have to go in front of the traffic, or they have to squeeze between the traffic. So where are the scooters going to go? It's an untenable situation. We already have too many things, or many things on the road already. You're not going to get people out of their cars, especially with the kind of weather we have in the winter. I don't know how many scooters we're going to have on the road in the winter. And the idea of seated scooters, you're not going to find a lot of senior citizens who want to sit in a scooter and ride on the street. First of all, it's dangerous. Secondly, for drivers, I've seen seated scooters. I know some people who are disabled and might need to use them. But when you're driving, you can't always see them because they're too low. At least a kid standing on a scooter, you can see him, or a person riding on a bicycle is high enough to see. A seated scooter is pretty dangerous. I wouldn't want to see too many of those on the road. So the biggest problem that I see is riding on the sidewalks, leaving them on the sidewalks, as people have said, and leaving them in dangerous places, and breaking the law in other ways besides riding on the sidewalk. As I said, going through a red light. I've seen kids going through stop signs, and I guess shouldn't call them kids. I know a lot of them are underage. Have I been talking that long? And I was surprised to hear that bikes can be ridden on sidewalks in some parts of town. I don't think there's enough education about any of these rules. I don't think people know that bikes can be ridden on sidewalks or where exactly they can be ridden. I think there's a lot more education that's needed, and there's a lot more enforcement that's needed. Right now we have a very dangerous situation, and I'm afraid to see what's going to happen this summer when the kids are out of school and all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, George Abbott White, you are next, and then Jill Winitzer, and then Ruth Geller after that.
Hi. See how this works. Okay, good. George Abbott White, Precinct 9. We've lived in Brookline 50 years and enjoyed it. Until a few days ago, I was president of the Town Meeting Members Association, and this issue came up in conversations. I'm glad that we're hearing about it now in a larger venue. This morning, I was headed toward Mass General, going down Beacon Street. Before I got there, I saw the usual unparked parking of scooters on Center Street. It's getting ubiquitous. But the real thing was passing Trader Joe's, passing the post office, heading down, to that first big light. There was someone, how shall I say, an adult on a scooter, working their cell phone and sailing through the red light at Park Street. Or St. Paul's, I guess. So I guess it's not just the kids, but it is the kids. So what I want to say right now is that over the last several months, with my handy little iPhone, I've piled up some wonderful photographs. A couple of kids on the scooter themselves, and trying to get a third one on. I thought that was pretty exciting. A coven of kids, 4 kids going up Coolidge Street, which, as people are now mentioning, with all the construction and all the parking, there's not a lot of space to go up or down any streets. So seeing the four of them like a coven going up the street, and of course going right through that stop sign at the end. As you know, the cut through on Winchester, the speed on it now, I think, is probably an average about 35 miles an hour, despite Todd's efforts to smooth in front of the senior center. So the kinds of behaviors that you've heard and will hear perhaps more of are not just a joke. You're looking at someone that taught kids for 42 years. And I think the first thing when I walked through the door of middle school or high school was always the safety of the young people that I was responsible for. And I guess I really am a little bit older because I still think that. I still believe that. And I think that we are not being responsible as a town by not being responsible to at least the young people. By allowing these kinds of behaviors. In fact, in encouraging them. What about bicycles? And I'm staring straight at Chris Dempsey, whose father is Mr. Bicycle in Brookline, and my daughter's ego ideal. what about bicycles? Well, we're not Amsterdam, that's true. We don't have that kind of awareness. But we are a Brookline that has had the experience of bicycles more than 100 years. People have been killed in Brookline, that's true. They have been killed on bicycles. But we have a general awareness of the physical nature of bikes. We know things about being careful to open doors. We don't just automatically run that yellow light because there might be somebody on a bike. So I don't think the bicycle situation is comparable. A bike is also governed by physical constraint in the sense that when we're moving it, we're a lot more aware not just of ourselves but the environment that we're in. But the scooter elides that. You just hit the button, and you go. And so then you don't quite know where you're going. So it's the lack of awareness of your general environment, I think, that makes them very dangerous. I'm glad, though, we had this pilot program. I'm very, very glad because the room is packed. And I think it has aroused a certain awareness by demonstrating not just the excitement that these could bring as an alternate to different forms of and more green modes of transportation, but that it's dramatized the dangers. And I'm thinking now, again, Chris, I'm thinking of the bicycle. For the most part, people are careful. They do try to do the right thing. I don't think we're encouraging enough safety for bicycles. And so my last remark is simply that, tough to say, even though a city as resourceful and sophisticated as New York should be able to think its way out of these kinds of problems, it's decided to think its way out by not having these scooters. And I hate to see us take a back seat, as it were, to those guys. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Jill?
Hi, I'm Jill Winnitzer. I live on Copley Street. I'm going to talk about a few different things. First, the parking of the scooters is a huge problem. I have a small sidewalk a very narrow sidewalk on my street. Scooters are parked in the middle of the sidewalk. I move them regularly. I don't know if there's something that can be done in the app that reminds people to park responsibly. I've seen scooters in the curb cuts. People just aren't thinking that others use the sidewalks as well. People in wheelchairs, people with strollers, people with walkers. So I think that there has to be some way to remind the riders to be responsible citizens. Also, and the other thing I want to talk about is Coolidge Corner. There's a lot of stuff going on in Coolidge Corner. There are signs everywhere. There are benches. There's tables. There's hydrants. There's waste receptacles, all sorts of things. And so to have the scooters randomly everywhere just makes the whole neighborhood look cluttered and messy and not inviting. And maybe we should think about having a corral for people to park the scooters in just a few spots in Coolidge Corner, not just leave them wherever you feel like. That's it.
Thank
One
you.
other thing, actually. I have seen people scooting on sidewalks, and I've flagged them and said, please ride your scooter on the street. People have been very receptive to listen to me, and I know not everyone feels comfortable doing that, but that's happened several times, and I think people are willing to hear the rules.
Thank you. Ruth?
Okay, thank you. Yes. My name is Ruth Geller. I am legally blind, and I'm not too swift on hearing either. I just want to say that those of us who reach a certain age, the mantra becomes, do not fall. We can't have another obstacle flying at us. We can't move back fast enough. We can't get out of the way fast enough. We would like to be able to use the beauty of the streets of Brookline like any other citizen without being afraid of getting hurt or hurting somebody by falling in the front of them. I don't want to stand here and state the obvious about being older and less able, but I don't think scooters belong in our environment. It belongs in a more rural area. I don't like to take away children's or people's pleasure, but it doesn't belong here. And that's just my opinion, and thank you for allowing me to express it.
Thank you for coming. Eleanor Small? Okay. Thank you very much for ceding your time. Susan Granoff will be next, and then Jane Ross Ped?
Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Oh, okay.
Jane Ross.
Jane Ross, after Susan.
Hello, I'm Susan Granoff. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 7, also an advisory committee member, and I live at 52 Vernon Street. Based on our experience with this pilot program, I don't believe rental e-scooters are appropriate or practical for Brookline, period. Here's why. Brookline, especially North Brookline, is different from the towns and cities where rental e-scooters have been successful. These municipalities typically have wide streets and multi-lane roadways, often with as many as 4 to 6 traffic lanes, and they do not have readily available forms of public transportation. In those municipalities, walking is not a popular daily form of transportation, as it is in Brookline, and their populations are heavily dependent on cars. In contrast, North Brookline, with the exception of Beacon Street, has narrow sidewalks and streets, many different forms of public transportation, and a heavy concentration of pedestrians. Many of our current roadways are so narrow that for safety's sake, they have to be designated as one-way. Our narrow roadways also must accommodate trolley tracks, moving cars, buses, trucks, and bicycles, as well as parked cars and thousands of pedestrians. Bicyclists have complained that they feel unsafe riding in our town's streets, and as a result, designated bike lanes have been created, but some bicyclists still ride on sidewalks because they say they feel unsafe on our narrow roadways. Yet now we are thinking of adding rental e-scooters to this mix? That seems insane. As for our sidewalks, most sidewalks in North Brookline are also very narrow, and many are often on hilly or unevenly paved ground. These narrow sidewalks already must accommodate numerous pedestrians, light poles, and trees and tree wells, which typically take up from 1/3 to 1/2 of sidewalk space, and areas set aside for hedges and other plantings in front of buildings, as well as people in wheelchairs and parents with strollers and toddlers walking next to the strollers. If e-scooter riders don't feel safe riding in designated bike lanes in our streets, as many have said they do not, we simply don't have room on our sidewalks to accommodate them without increasing the danger to pedestrians or, at the least, making pedestrians feel unsafe. Further, it is not at all clear that the use of rental e-scooters will result in any genuine net reductions in carbon emissions. Most of the current riders seem to be using rental e-scooters because they provide fun, spur-of-the-moment joy rides, which is why so few riders wear helmets. Most riders are treating them as toys, not as substitutes for car rides. In contrast, I've heard from many pedestrians, as we have tonight, who say that the appearance of rental e-scooters on sidewalks while being ridden or when left strewn across sidewalks have made walking so unpleasant and unsafe that they are now more likely to take their cars to run errands rather than walking as they had done before. This will only add to carbon emissions. Brookline is renowned for being a walker's paradise, and many people move to Brookline especially for that reason. Brookline sidewalks should be a safe haven for pedestrians. but permitting rental e-scooters on our sidewalks and running through red lights will make walking less safe and Brookline less desirable. Should rental e-scooters be approved beyond this trial period, I also think that the rental companies should pay a fee to the town sufficient to cover the cost of our police officers having to spend hours of extra time enforcing e-scooter regulations to ensure the town's public safety. Just in the first few weeks of operation, the police department reported spending an additional 104 hours on such enforcement, time that otherwise could have been used to enforce other regulations or to perform other critical policing functions. Additionally, e-scooters should not be permitted to run through red lights, which under our town's current regulations, they are.
That's actually not true.
We were told by the police department that it was.
Those were they're not required to have turn signals on the scooter.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I also think that the rental companies should be required to provide liability insurance for each ride. Finally, I do think that the town lends itself open to a class action ADA suit if we do not do a better job of providing corrals for the e-scooters rather than letting them be strewn about. In conclusion, I urge that the town not approve the use of rental e-scooters beyond this trial period, because no matter how well it's done in other communities, it simply does not make sense to have it in Brookline.
Thank you, Susan. Jane? And then after Jane, Christy Jensen and Dave Porter after that.
Okay. My name is Jane Ross. I live on Kilsyth Road, so that's most of the way to Cleveland Circle, where things really do get fast. I recently saw someone on a scooter riding full speed down the bike lane in the wrong direction. That's an accident waiting to happen. But the moving violations are actually, I think, not as important as the scooters that are left strewn over the sidewalk everywhere I walk. And I'm on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, though I'm speaking for myself today. We've been doing a lot of talking about the visually impaired and the blind and all that stuff and looking at traffic signals for them. And so I've learned a lot about those issues. So someone who, and it's not just the visually impaired, it's also people who are looking at their cell phones and anybody at night who's not going to see these things. But imagine someone who can't see well, who's used to walking down a sidewalk with a cane, following the wall, and there's a scooter there that they're not expecting, and they trip over it. There's nothing for them to grab onto, and they're going to fall on hard cement, possibly hitting their head. The liability here is huge for permanent disability or even death. I mean, these are fatal accidents, particularly with the elderly. I have been hearing from people that they're afraid of this, and I think it's really, really serious. I think people aren't taking it seriously. When I ask scooter riders not to ride on the sidewalk, I get blank stares. They're not nasty, they just have no clue. I think this is a really bad idea. I've watched some webinars, about walking. There are national companies that put them on, and some towns are using painted parking areas for scooters. I think that would be an improvement, not just in Coolidge Corner, but town-wide. But I really don't think these are adding to our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. So Christy, then Dave Porter, and then after that, an M. Yassin. And
Hi.
I'll just remind folks, we're almost halfway through the list, and it's been an hour. So,
Hi, my name's Christy Jensen. I'm trying to. Sorry, I'm a little tall for this thing. I've lived in Brookline for 2.5 years. I moved here from Salt Lake City because I wanted to live in a place where I didn't have to own a car and could rely full-time on micromobility. Since moving here, I've actually taken a job working in micromobility. So this isn't just my lawn or my lane. This is my livelihood and my life. So when I say that I'm a micromobility expert, I'm not just saying it from a user standpoint. I'm saying it because this is what I live and do every day. I work with 25 municipalities across the United States in both scooter share and bike share. Unfortunately, Boston's not one of them, though I wish it was. In the past 3 weeks, since the weather's gotten nice, on my commute, I have seen over a dozen people share the lane with me on their scooters as I ride my bike. Not just in Brookline, but from Brookline to downtown Boston on privately owned scooters, as well as Lime and Bird scooters that obviously didn't leave Brookline. Scooters are one of those things that really add to the micromobility of our communities. They add mobility for people who otherwise don't feel comfortable riding a bike or simply cannot. In DC, when scooter share was introduced, 40% of the users that were interviewed said that they had never used bike share. So to simply tell people, don't use a scooter, use a bike, isn't a reality. And for a lot of people, if they're not using a scooter, they're using Lyft. I want to speak a little bit to the fatality study that everyone keeps quoting. In Massachusetts, we have 6 million residents, and in 2018, we had 336 fatalities with motor vehicles. Those were crashes in which everyone involved died, and an additional 300 motor vehicle accidents where one person died. That's over 600 injuries due to automobiles. And yet, when there are 271 injuries with over 1 million users of micromobility in a 3-month period, these are injuries, not deaths. We get a little bit up in arms. It's important to look at the data from a 1,000 scope view instead of looking at one number. Additionally, the idea that we need to be more like New York City is also insulting, not just to our community, but to New York City, who has banned e-bikes and routinely confiscates the e-bikes of delivery workers who are just trying to feed the city. Banning scooters in Brookline doesn't make Brookline safer. We need to create the infrastructure to make our community safer. That means taking public space, our roads, and not making them dedicated 100% to cars. We have to tailor our roads to our users, and our users are bicycles and other forms of micromobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Porter?
Hi, my name's Dave Porter. I live over on Clark Road, also slightly tall for this podium. So the scooters, on balance, I think, are fantastic. They let any abled person travel farther without forethought and without a car. I've seen lots of young folks using them, as I think we all have. And as a parent of 2 young kids, I want them to be able to get around that easily when they reach independent biking age. And believe me, my kids, and lots of parents' kids soon, are going to know all about doing it safely and about respecting pedestrians. Having these trips take place on scooters eases congestion, which improves the road for trips that do need cars. For folks that, I'm sorry? Oh, sure.
You know what? Just project, Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do
The
it.
back of the house.
And for folks that choose to continue to use cars, and for trips that require cars, it eases congestion for all those for all those users. A recent survey by the Portland Bureau of Transportation found that 34% of scooter trips replaced car trips there. They're not toys, and they're not just joyrides, although they do look fun. Regarding safety, I agree with the gentleman from the pedestrian committee that they should be treated like bikes, and that we need to restrict their uses in some places, and that we need to expand areas that are big enough for safe walking, biking, and scootering. I also agree that bad behavior is decreasing and will continue to do so. And I also agree with the woman who said that the scooter companies should be providing some form of insurance. Regarding bad parking, Scooters are left lying across sidewalks, across access ramps. That's bad and it's serious. As with any new etiquette situation, I think basic selfishness and obliviousness is going to dominate at first. And then there's a backlash, which applies strong social pressure and some hopefully light-handed systemic pressure, but as heavy as needed. And then we end up in a new, better place. The backlash is good and it's important, but let's not let it overwhelm the progress that we're going to be seeing from these scooters on mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so M. Yassin, and then I believe Cindy Lee? Seeley?
I think Marty left.
Okay.
Marty Yassin left.
Okay, so Cindy is next, and then an L. Davis? And then Frank Caro? I didn't even see Frank come in. Oh, he left. Okay.
I shouldn't follow the top person, I guess, huh? Hi, my name is Cindy Lee. I'm actually talking as a resident of Brookline. I am on the Transportation Board. I'd like to bring attention to two situations that have occurred. I have a handicap spot in front of my house. Sorry, can you hear me better? Okay. A Lime scooter was left in the gutter of a handicap spot in front of my house. I called Lime, and they were actually very nice. I explained where I lived, I need to get my mother to an appointment, and they said they would expedite the call and have somebody come out immediately. Took about 20 minutes, which I don't think is bad. Gentleman drove up in a Lexus SUV, threw the Lime scooter in the back seat, and drove off. Just recently, long weekend, Sunday morning, I was going to take my mother out, and there was a Bird scooter left right in the walkway of the handicap spot that my mother needed to walk out through. I called Bird, and I want to say young because he's younger than me, said that I told him the situation, I need to get my mother out of the house, and could he send somebody to remove the scooter? He said, well, you know, I'm in California, I really can't. I'm like, you don't have any representative in Brookline to come to pick up the scooter. He said, no, I'll try, but I'm in California. I called the Brookline Police, the non-emergency line. The woman, the officer, was very kind. She said she would look for a squad car to come out and to assist me. Went into the kitchen to finish something up, walked over, and there was a young kid signing up for the scooter. I don't know if he was there to take it away or if he was just going to use it. So I yelled out to him and said, hey, did you know you really shouldn't leave these scooters in a handicapped spot or anywhere on the sidewalk that blocks access? He said, oh, well, I was just going to pick it up. I was just going to use it because I just saw it here. So I don't know whatever happened to that. I don't believe that Bird was sending anybody out to get it since he was across the states. Second, I did call back the police and explain the situation that somebody took it away. Do I think that they are a hazard on the sidewalk for people walking? I do. Do I think that we should all have different modes of transportation? Certainly. But when you rent a scooter and it says not to be on a sidewalk, probably should wear a helmet. Being on Babcock Street, I'm assuming that there'll be youth students riding up and down the street on the sidewalk, in the street, swerving in and out without helmets. It's best when I see them, actually, two of them on one scooter. And I don't know if when you actually rent one, if either company tells them that they need to be off the sidewalk and to wear a helmet. I do think wearing a helmet is a concern. I think that, as the previous gentleman said, the courtesy of not blocking sidewalks and making sure that they're not in a curb cutout or just left lying down or blocking a sidewalk, the path, is something that needs to be enforced. I don't know how we're going to enforce it. I think it's a little hard.
and I need one of those for my knee. But I do think that being on the sidewalks is a concern. I think that you have a lot of different class of pedestrians walking around, and it's an issue. But again, so that's
Okay.
it.
Thank you, Cindy. L. Davis? And then after that, Mary Radin? Okay.
I'm Linda Davis, town meeting member from Precinct 10, and I received an email from a woman on Marion Street, and she would appreciate if I read this tonight
Please.
because she couldn't be here. So this is from Adele Pike of Marion Street. I live on Marion Street in Coolidge Corner and prefer to walk rather than drive. So in the past 2+ months, I have encountered many a rider or riders on e-scooters in Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, Brookline Village, Audubon Circle / St. Mary's, and the Longwood Avenue route between Coolidge Corner and the medical area. The regulations for these scooters are ambiguous, and Brookline does not have a police force large enough to enforce what limited regulations there are. I have seen fewer than 10 riders wearing helmets. I've seen riders on sidewalks. I've seen riders ignoring traffic lights and pedestrian crosswalks. I have seen 2 riders on one scooter at least half a dozen times. I've seen scooters that have fallen over blocking sidewalks. Saturday evening, June 8th, ABC Nightly News featured a story about Nashville, where the mayor is now advocating for a ban on the scooters because of injuries to and at least 1 death of a rider. The CDC reports at least 8 deaths related to e-scooters nationwide. Paris has now banned these devices. Other cities nationally and globally are seriously reconsidering them due to injuries and difficulties regulating who uses them and how they use them. I continue to worry for the safety of riders and for the safety of pedestrians. Adele Pike, Brookline. By the way, I was clipped by a bike waiting to cross the street with a traffic light on my way here.
I hope you weren't jaywalking.
Never. Never.
Okay. So Mary is Nick? Sorry.
Marge Radin.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Marge Radin, St. Paul.
And then David Krupp will be after that. So if you can get close to the podium.
I am a cyclist, and I'm basically in favor of e-scooters under one condition, that we find, like everybody else has said, that we find a way to keep them off the sidewalks. Those riding on the sidewalks are being inconsiderate and dangerous to seniors, kids, and other walkers. I'm assuming parents, because you need a credit card, I'm assuming parents have okayed their kids to use this because kids at the age of 14 and 16 can't get credit cards without a parent's signature. So I'm assuming the parents know they're doing that, and they're okay with that, so that's fine. Let the parents deal with the kids' issue. The people who don't wear helmets, I just hope they have health insurance. I don't care about them. However, I want to be able to walk on the street without worrying about scooters coming at me in all directions, without having to trip over them for people like Ruth. And I know they're narrow, but we don't allow bicycles on the sidewalk, so why should scooters be any different? And the other thing is, I have spoken to people who are riding on the scooters, and they laugh at me. We know the rules, we don't care. So somehow, the sidewalks to me are the big issue. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Marge.
yield my time to everybody else.
Okay. Much appreciated. So David Krupp, and then after David, I think it's Bill Schechter. Yes, that's probably what that says.
Good evening. My name is David Krupp. I live on Osborne Road in Brookline. I think it's difficult, really, to disagree with a lot of the safety concerns people have raised. I've certainly seen everything that has been mentioned, the scooters being left in the middle of the sidewalk, people riding on the sidewalk. I don't have any easy solutions, but I do think that anytime you have an alternative for people to get around not using a car, that's a good thing. So I think we really should try to solve some of these problems and not just dismiss the scooters as a good alternative. I don't have solutions for everything, but I do think this issue of the scooters being left on the sidewalk could be addressed, perhaps a win-win, where the scooter companies agree to put in what we normally use as bike racks on sidewalks. You know, they could basically fund it. And the riders of the scooters would just have to find the nearest bike rack. There would be more than one on every block. And somehow they would tether it. Doesn't have to be locked. But just tethering it to a post would then, in effect, check it back in and meet the requirement that they return the scooter. Just a more general comment. I think we tend to be much harder on things that are new and different than things that we're used to. And as I sat listening, sometimes people were talking about scooters, but you could have thought they were talking about cars. You know, people don't yield to pedestrians in crosswalks. People park them where they're not supposed to be parked, and it's dangerous. We should be asking ourselves, why do we have a higher standard for the scooters, let's say, than the motor vehicle? I mean, if you could ask the question, is it going to be dangerous to have cars in Brookline? The answer would be, well, one pedestrian is going to get struck by a car every week. I mean, that's basically what the police statistics tell us. So we need to be asking the question, why are we okay with that, but we're not okay with this?
Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge that our state rep, Tommy Vitolo, has just walked in. If anyone has not met him, I'm sure he would love to hear from any constituent. Okay.
Did he come because he knew I was about to speak?
I believe the answer is yes.
You've got my vote.
Yeah, that's Bill Schechter.
Bill Schechter, Brook Street. And I represent a transportation stream that may not be as well represented by private companies here, and that is pedestrians. It was disheartening, I have to say, to hear the leader of the pedestrian subcommittee in Brookline advocating for allowing scooters on sidewalks. If that's the level of representation for pedestrians, we pedestrians are in trouble. But I'm not pure. I also ride bikes, and I also occasionally use my car. I'm skeptical that e-scooters have really taken a bite out of car commuting in Brookline. Many people who work live a distance away. You know, I'd say it's mainly a college student phenomenon at this point. Whenever there's a change, and in this case, it's what's been described as, well, it's just another transportation stream. It's actually one more transportation stream. And the law of unintended consequence is always busy whenever there's change, and sometimes in a good way, sometimes not. You know, after World War II, another private company had a great idea for improving our transportation, and it involved introducing gasoline-powered buses into our cities. That was the modern thing to do. Critics were derided as clock stoppers and old fogies. Because not many questions were asked, because progress seemed so inevitable, we lost a good part of our country's train system, intercity trolleys, and so on. There was a high cost. And I'm not suggesting e-scooters are as problematic as gasoline-powered buses, but I mention that historical example to make the point that it's important to ask questions and really kind of ventilate the issue. So these are my questions. Some of them have been addressed before, but maybe since there's only 5 of them, it will give them more emphasis. I'd like to know, number 1, how many scooters are coming to Brookline if we decide after the pilot program we're going full e-scooter? How many? Number 2, the dockless system. That's, for me, a major part of the problem, because I recognize that scooters in the street, please, are clean, they're green, they look like a lot of fun, But to have them strewn about is really a problem, I think. And we need some storage areas. I think somebody mentioned corrals. At least painted areas on the sidewalk to give people a visual cue, a reminder that this is where we put the scooters when we're done with them. And if that means it creates an inconvenience for somebody who wants to use a scooter, they have to walk 1 or 2 blocks to get the scooter, that's okay. That's, to me, a reasonable balance. Number 3, excuse me. Drivers, drivers have been getting it in the neck here. But if I park my car in a handicapped spot, there is going to be a consequence from the Brookline Police. What is the consequence to a rider or a company that puts their bike in a cutaway on the sidewalk? There needs to be a system of accountability. Our parks, there must be unfettered access to our parks for everyone. We can't have scooters blocking pathways. And I might say, I don't think the scooters that have been strewn about various days on the Muddy River really improves the beauty of Olmsted's parks. Okay? I don't think so. I don't think that can be improved. And Amory Park, there was a scooter blocking the pathway. Safety, we want to encourage people to wear helmets, but let's also think about ways to make things safe for pedestrians. Last point, we cannot wait years for a culture of responsibility to develop while elderly folks, maybe young folks, fall and really injure themselves. One fall is too many if caused by a scooter, because the consequences are very severe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bill Mitchell and then Adam Schaefer.
Hi, thanks for doing this. My name is Bill Mitchell. I live on Alton Place. One of the things I like best about living in Brookline is not owning a car. I've been an enthusiastic rider of the scooters. I appreciated getting a free helmet from Lime, but I have to say, on balance, I've not been impressed with the way the companies have addressed the very legitimate issues that have been raised here tonight. Are the company representatives still here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to cede my time to get some answers from them, and then I have a question for the remainder of my time for the sergeant in charge of enforcement. Why haven't you been more aggressive? I got a free helmet after the first week. I appreciated it. But I've seen no evidence of the companies making an effort to put helmets on riders by providing free helmets. You stand to make a lot of money on this project. Why not be more assertive in looking out for the safety of riders? And why not do more in terms of picking up the scooters that are strewn around the sidewalks? Please.
Scott, do you feel comfortable answering?
I should hope you would.
I feel like the end.
Let's just do it right now.
I'm glad you got one of our, my name is Scott Mullen, I'm the Director of Expansion for Lime, and I'm glad you got one of our helmets. Thank you for bringing it here tonight. We gave away 250,000 of those around the world, and this is something, it's not a requirement. It is something that, of course, we encourage. We have it in the app, wear a helmet. A lot of these trips that people take, it's, oh, I just missed my bus. I don't have my helmet with me. It doesn't mean I don't have to get to work. They'll hop on it and they'll go. We do safety demos. We do trainings. We have a deeper curriculum that we're developing right now that we're going to start doing on a bi-weekly basis. We'll be sending out invitations for that. For people who may not have ridden a scooter before, are interested, they want to try it out, but they want to do it in a controlled environment. I mean, this is the sort of thing we want to make sure that people are comfortable, and so helmets will be a part of that as well.
Mm-hmm. I will also say that the Massachusetts bike law is you have to wear a helmet if you're under 16, but you don't if you're over 16. And, you know, the pilot, we're the only one to do this in the Commonwealth, but there is state legislation that is coming. And so we said we wanted to see everybody wearing a helmet because we think it's the safest option, but that might be overridden depending on what the state legislature comes back with addressing micromobility.
Sergeant, what's the procedure been so far in terms of the police department? If you see someone riding on the sidewalk or not wearing a helmet, I understand it's not technically against state law. Do you have the flexibility to intervene and at least encourage people to do the right thing?
We do, and it is an active role of the police officers. We've actually had over 200 stops of scooters for violations, whether it be sidewalks, helmets. So it is occurring, but it just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. But there is a large amount of scooters, and it's certainly more than we can handle to stop everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so after Bill, Adam?
I am not too tall for this. First, I want to actually thank Heather. We've had some emails. I feel like you've been very engaged and responsive, and even though I think our positions are probably different, I appreciate your responsiveness.
Okay, that's why the name is familiar. Okay.
And extremely email responsive and very responsive, and I want to say, sorry, Adam Schaefer. I live near the Pierce School, so I very much appreciate your responsiveness. Before I get into my opinion, another general comment I want to make, and the sergeant started addressing this, is that this cries out for data. There's a lot of I imagine, I think, and we really need data. So certainly the traffic stops, I think, are a key piece of data. I think, how many rides, I've heard a few numbers, that would be helpful. I think also another number that would be very informative is the average duration per ride, because one of the things that's certainly been debated is, are these in lieu of car rides, or are they because they're fun? And I think average duration per ride would at least speak to that, if not definitively be dispositive about that. That said, I think they're a terrible idea. I think ultimately the first responsibility of the town is public safety. And all we are debating is the degree of the decrement to pedestrian safety. You can argue it makes pedestrians a little more safe, or it makes pedestrians a lot more safe. And there's been, I think, a healthy, robust debate about that. But ultimately, it's about the degree of the decrement to public safety of the pedestrians, and not whether or not there will be a decrement to pedestrian safety. And I'm sort of troubled that I think it sort of fits a pattern of a sort of indifference on the part of the town to pedestrian safety, because I've raised pedestrian safety issues in the past, and they've sort of been met with deaf ears, which I think is unfortunate. Because as people point out, sidewalks belong to pedestrians; they are for walking. And I was really troubled by the notion suggested earlier that because the laws might be difficult to enforce, we should just abandon them. How about we try to implement and enforce the laws that keep our people safe, even if it's hard, and that's, goodness knows, not a reason to abandon them. There are a lot of laws that may be difficult to enforce that I think we can all agree ought to be on the books. And I have no doubt that the Brookline Police are working very, very hard and in good faith trying to keep us safe and enforcing this. But as the sergeant said, there's no absolute way to do that. They can't have all their resources trying to keep the bikes from whizzing around pedestrians on the sidewalk. I want to directly address a question that was brought up earlier, which is how are these different from cars? Well, in one way, the cars at least infrequently drive on the sidewalks. Not never, but infrequently do they drive on the sidewalks. So that is a distinction, because that question was asked. I mean, one of the main arguments I think that has been proffered is that they are environmentally beneficial, and I think that's sort of questionable, because that gets down. First of all, they don't have a zero carbon footprint. They need to be recharged. That requires electricity, and if you assume that they keep people out of cars, then you can potentially make that argument. But I don't think that assumption is backed up with data. And I think Brookline is different enough. I don't think the data from other towns can reasonably be generalized to Brookline. That's why it'd be great to have data. If there's Brookline-specific data, that might sway me. But data from Portland or other towns that are fundamentally cities that are fundamentally different, I don't think is generalizable, and I don't think is a good idea. And I also was concerned based on the experience I heard mentioned from the person who called, I believe, I want to get the company right because it matters, I believe Bird, and had them basically shrug and not respond, because if you look at the contracts they signed with Brookline, and Heather, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it says if they are put in inappropriate places and contacted, they're supposed to remove them. That is
Within
their
2 hours.
responsibility under the contract. And, that speaks to the companies not acting in good faith, because the contracts, I looked at them, they're not, they're relatively short, they're not unduly onerous, and if the companies aren't able to adhere to the contracts during the pilot, when they know they're being scrutinized, I don't think that speaks in a very encouraging way as to what we should expect from the companies going forward. So just in conclusion, these are dangerous. It's just a question of how dangerous. And I think if the question is how dangerous is too dangerous, the question is as dangerous as these scooters are is the answer. So thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Davis, I saw him get up. Is he not in the room anymore? Jonathan Davis? Oh, no, he is. Okay, Jonathan. And then after Jonathan is Scott Ananian, great. And Dan DeSenza will be after that.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Davis. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 10. I live on Park Street. I have just a few observations, if I could. First of all, I tend to be out at Coolidge Corner between 7 and 7:30 every morning. And the strange thing that I find is right around the T-stops on Beacon Street, I see Lime and Bird scooters lined up waiting for riders. Which strikes me as strange because the T is right there, which makes me wonder whether the objective really is to sort of take ridership away from the T rather than getting riders to come in from more outlying areas to use the T. So that's just one observation. Another is, and this is more of a rhetorical question, to what extent are the companies required to provide education for their customers about the rules of the road and about the riders' obligations to abide by Brookline riding laws, and extending that, I wonder to what extent the select board is going to take it upon itself to require that the companies and that the town provide education for e-scooter riders as to their responsibilities. And finally, this is a rhetorical question. It's supposed to rain tomorrow, and I hope that everybody here, when they are outside tomorrow, count the number of e-scooters that are riding around in the rain, and count the number of bicycles that are riding around in the rain, and then compare them to the number of pedestrians who are walking in the rain, and compare them to the number of cars that are on the road in the rain, and compare them to the number of riders on the T. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, then Dan DeSenza, and then after that, Arthur, and, okay. Okay. You can divide your 5 minutes as whatever you want. Okay, Scott.
Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Mannion, town meeting member from Precinct 10. I'm not in my 20s or even my 30s anymore. In fact, all those demographics seem to be quite underrepresented at the podium tonight. I really enjoy the scooters. There's a bit of a chicken and egg problem initially, as Bird would send me a free helmet for the cost of shipping, but only after I'd ridden once. So I will admit that I was a very tentative scofflaw for a very short trip so I could qualify. But after the helmet arrived, I started to find all sorts of short trips I could scooter instead of drive, especially up and down Washington Street, so I could come here to Town Hall. Just to be clear, I'm not riding for fun. These meetings here are not all that enjoyable. Trust me on that. The more you come to them, the less enjoyable. So even if you scooter to get to them, it doesn't change. As someone who hadn't ridden a bike for years, I was initially a little bit appalled at the state of bike lanes in town. I'd sort of thought of our town as a bike-forward town. But that, the bike lanes exist, but then suddenly they stop, and then you're suddenly thrust into traffic. And especially on Washington Street, the traffic goes at quite a good clip. Crossing the street is also fraught. I don't feel comfortable crossing multiple lanes of traffic on only a little scooter, so I admit that I will bring the scooter onto the sidewalk and walk it across the crosswalk to keep myself safe. I've also taken the scooter on the sidewalk when the bike lane was blocked by a delivery truck, and I didn't feel safe against swerving into traffic to get around it. I carefully park my scooter in a bike rack when I'm done with it, and we don't actually need separate painted areas. They're bike racks. People know where to park bikes, and scooters are just them. And the app makes me take a picture, at least the Bird app, to confirm that I've parked it safely. So I don't know if more enforcement is needed, but I know that the data is certainly there to go after people who don't leave their scooters in a safe place. I personally haven't witnessed any bad behavior on scooters. Perhaps I'm just not looking hard to police others. I do see lots of bad behavior in cars, including listening to music and tapping at phones. And certainly cars in the streets make me worry for the safety of my kids. So let's improve our bike lanes. Let's have sensible rules that acknowledge that folks might need to use sidewalks in some circumstances. And sometimes they might need to go out without helmets for some circumstances, like the speaker before said. If I've been in that situation where I was running late on time and I'd forgotten to bring my helmet ahead of time, I empathize with that. But thank you for doing this, Scooter Pilot. And as someone who cares about climate and the environment, I hope that we continue to make them available and to design our public spaces moving forward so that scooters and bicycles and pedestrians and other electric vehicles can coexist. We saw a glimpse of this with the Beacon Street Bridle Path pilot, which I think everyone really enjoyed. That's the future of Brookline. Let's go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Dan.
Hi, yes, I'm Dan DeSenza of Waverly Street in Brookline. There's two things that I guess I can offer to you tonight. Number one is anecdotal evidence. You've heard a lot of it tonight. I've moved 3 scooters off of a handicap wheelchair cut on Pond Avenue. I kicked them out of the way. I've also seen a lot of kids riding and having a hell of a good time. You don't need more of that. I can also tell you my opinion. Maybe you want that or don't want that. I think virtually all of these rides that I see, or the vast majority of these rides, are people having a hell of a good time. 2 high school girls going down Cypress Street and then turning on and coming back on Cypress Street. This good man that just told us here, he rode on Washington Street where there's a bus lane. So I really wonder what percentage of the bikes of these rides are replacing automobiles. It's great, it's a wonderful convenience, but I think to go forward with the goal of this program, with the goal of reducing the carbon footprint by replacing automobiles, is wishful thinking. I think we probably all can see that at the face. So those are the 2 things that I'll offer you. But what I would like very much from you is for you to answer the question I heard asked twice before. This is a trial program. What is the trial? What is the criteria for success? What data are you collecting? And upon what standards are you going to judge this program to be a success or a failure? And how is this extension based?
Sure. I'll answer.
Great.
I guess I was curious to see whether or not these could coexist with pedestrians and motor vehicle traffic. I wanted to get a sense of whether or not there were injuries, whether or not people are complying with not riding on the sidewalk. We needed over 6 months because we knew that there was going to be bad behavior as we rolled out the pilot. So criteria for success, I want to see, we'll probably do some sort of user survey towards the fall to see how many people are giving up some sort of motor vehicle and taking this instead, because one of the goals was reducing carbon emissions. Providing access, being on the select board, I hear time and time again that they're reducing bus service, that people are very aggravated that the Green Line is always over capacity. So I want to see whether or not this would supplement some of the transit trips. But I really need to consult with the rest of the board to see whether or not these criteria are what.
So you don't have standards for those criteria. In other words, you don't say, we want to see a certain percentage of rides to be replacing automobiles before we declare this to be carbon improvement.
We will talk about that as a
So
board.
you haven't developed those things, you haven't developed those yet?
No.
Okay. So when do you think are you going to develop them after the program ends?
Yes. We'll
Okay.
talk about them
So,
in
but how
open
do you know,
session.
but if you're going to develop those standards for success after the program ends, aren't you missing out the period in which you're supposed to should be collecting the data?
Well, part of the data collection is the number of trips that have been.
But, excuse me, if you're not going to develop the standards for success until the end, you don't develop the test. If you don't develop the test to the end, how do you know what data to collect along the way? You haven't been collecting along the way.
Well, the data is number of injuries, number of complaints to the police department. All of this data is being collected along the way. What we need to do is figure out the values and the priorities, which the 5 select board members will talk about in open session. And there is a lot of data that we'll be able to look at and see whether or not we're comfortable with the data that has been collected. The user survey is probably one of the last components, and that is to collect demographic data that we don't have access to
So,
because of privacy.
so the data about who the users are?
Yep.
And data about how many car trips they...
That's correct.
They
Right now,
replace?
we have rides, we have average trip length, where they're going.
What has that showed you so far?
It's shown me that there is a huge appetite for this technology. I mean, the person who said that there were 50,000 trips since launch of April 1st is correct. That's the data that I've been given. That's an enormous amount of trips. Now, I don't think that they have replaced a car every single time. So what we need to do is independently verify how many of those trips are replacing motor vehicles. And we'll do that independent from the companies.
By
with our own-
surveying the users?
Yes. Yep. So we'll do that. That will be one component of our matrix to make value-based
So
decisions.
you're going to ask every user whether they and ask them all of their trips?
We will attempt to reach every user. I also
because there's a bias you're going to run into. You may find that there are users who are proud of the fact that they're using it instead of their car, and those may be the people that self-select and give you a positive response.
That is a risk. The other thing that I have committed to doing in the 2 times that I've visited the senior center, I see Pat nodding her head, is to try to reach out to people who are not users of these devices. So people like yourself that are coming to these public meetings to better understand your experience as a pedestrian or as an operator of a motor vehicle, to see what has your experience been, because there is a bias if we're only asking people who are willing to go on these devices.
Yeah, and I would just caution you, you owe the town. I mean, there's a lot of people who tell you they're very emotionally charged and involved in this thing, but seriously, you owe the town to do this as a serious study, to look at it scientifically, and to look at the goals, and to come up with tests that are actually fair tests to judge whether or not this program meets those goals. And that's all I'm asking you to do. And I'd also like you to publish your plans for how you're going to do this testing. And to let people know, because you've sold this as a trial, let people know how the trial is going to run and what the criterion are, even if you're just developing them at this point. I think that's, other than reporting on what you heard from people complaining about bikes in the way and such, I think that's your primary obligation, in my mind, is that you do that. You fulfill your obligation to the town to tell them how the trial is set up and how it's going to be judged. And I'd appreciate that very much.
Okay. I think that's a fair charge, so thank you. Arthur, and what was it, Renee? Renska?
Hi, we live on Park Street, 125 Park. My main issue is safety. I have a dog. When we moved to, and I walk everywhere, I do commute by car to go to work. I'm a teacher. And my main concern is safety and walking with my dog on the sidewalk. When we moved here or shopping, it's become really, really dangerous for people who live very close to Trader Joe's or CVS or any, the theater, which is exactly where we live, because the scooters come up Park Street and then they turn on Beacon Street, and it's very much more attractive to go on the sidewalk than it is to navigate through Coolidge Corner, the center of Coolidge Corner there. When we moved here, we had 3 cars. We have 1 car now, and we bought specifically because the walk score was so high. I love to come home in the afternoon and just park my car. So my biggest frustration is that there is absolutely no enforcement that I can see. I've watched 2 cop cars go behind people on scooters in the middle of Coolidge Corner. Absolutely nothing. No helmets on the sidewalk. And people are not friendly on the scooters. If you ask them to go on the bike lane, they're not friendly at all. So that's my input. I think that they're a terrible idea for this city. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Roger Blood is next. And then, oh, okay, sorry, Roger.
I'll stand over here now.
Okay.
My name is Arthur Bronstein, and I live on Park Street in Brookline. Can you hear me?
Barely.
No?
Right into the mic.
How about now? Jeez. Okay. I'm a pedestrian. And as a pedestrian, I walked here from my home on Park Street. And I saw something very, very unusual when I was walking here. What I saw was a scooter rider wearing a helmet in the bike lane. I was stunned. Now, why is that important? That's important because that's the exception, not the rule. And I thought a little bit about some of the other conversations and some of the things that you've been asked, and particularly about the success criteria for the pilot, which in most pilots are set before the pilot starts. This one seems a little bit different, but I'm sure it'll be well managed. And I thought about who's responsible for the success of this pilot. Well, it's not you in the town, right? You put the pilot in place. You had the idea of doing it. It's not the police department. They can't be everywhere all the time. Burden is on the scooter riders and the company that provides the scooters. They're the ones who have to make this success a pilot. So what would this pilot look like if it were a success? Well, people would be coming in and they would be saying, most of the time, the scooter riders were wearing helmets. Most of the time, they're not on the sidewalks. Most of the time, they put their scooters where they're supposed to. But that's not what we're hearing from the people who are here, who are dealing with the scooters. What we're hearing is that the scooter riders are scofflaws, and that the company that provides the scooters isn't or can't do very much about it. Now, maybe we can blame them, maybe not. I'm not sure that's the most important thing. What we're dealing with is a situation in which the laws or the rules governing how the scooters are supposed to be used are unenforceable. And we've heard nothing about how they can become more enforceable. It's not the police department's job to make sure that this happens. Burdens on the scooters, the scooter riders and the company, and there's nothing they're going to be able to do about it. Now, I haven't heard anything about what they're going to do about it. I've heard a few things. I've heard a few assertions. We've given away 250,000 helmets. Great. How many people are using the helmets? Is there any tracking of people who are using them? Giving them is one thing, having them used is another. I've heard about the urgency of accelerating scooter adoption in order to save the planet, to save the climate. That's a little bit self-serving. It sounds righteous, but I guess that's fine. I've heard about how low the accident rate is. I've heard about data. But the data suggests from the Portland Transportation Bureau that scooters are about 20 times more dangerous in terms of injuries than automobiles, 5 times more than motorcycles, and 4 times more than bicycles. So the danger is there. We know that scooter accidents are feeding liability practices, both in terms of class action lawsuits and individual lawsuits. We know that cities are now part of these lawsuits. Montoya versus the city of San Diego the city of San Diego is now party to a lawsuit under the ADA. So we're hearing about this, and we continue to hear promises about how it's going to get better. It's going to get better as people become more familiar with the scooters. It's going to become better as the scooter companies provide more training. But honestly, that sounds like promises and more promises. I don't see how it's going to get better if the scooter riders don't behave better and if the scooter companies don't behave better. What are the forces that are going to cause this to become better? What we have is a situation in which the rules are unenforceable and the technology is not ready for prime time. The technology is inherently dangerous. We've seen Mayor Sam Liccardo from the city of San Jose call for geofencing and suggest banning in order to have geofencing. And we've had the mayor of Seattle, and I'll read her, Mayor Jenny Durkin, and this is her quote, "Every mayor who's got them," referring to the scooters, "comes up to me and says, 'Don't take them.'" It's the mayor of Seattle, not exactly a city that rejects innovation or new ideas. The information that we needed going into this pilot we already had. There's no law that exempts the city of Brookline from the laws of physics. Other cities have had problems with scooters. We're having them. We're going to continue to have them until the technology is ready and until we're able to enforce these rules. We should go back to the drawing board and we should make sure that the scooter company, the scooter technology are ready. We're simply not ready to continue this program. Thank you.
Okay, Roger, and then Kathy Lula?
So I'm Roger Blood, and until the last couple of speakers, I thought I was going to be the first one to speak only about the pilot itself rather than the other issues. So I'm thrilled that the two prior gentlemen spoke to the concerns about the pilot and the way it's been structured and is being implemented. My whole experience, and I think others, whatever your field is, medicine or business or academia, is that a pilot is designed with the criteria for success and approval for becoming permanent up front. They're designed and they're used for determining whether to proceed. I appreciate, Selectman Hamilton, that you made some remarks tonight about the criteria. Until you did, I wasn't sure there were any at all, but I'm happy to know that it's been given some thought. I would suggest and reinforce the other two people that spoke about this, that these become much more formalized, much more complete, and we're, 2 months into a 6 or 7 month pilot, that within the next 30 days or so, that the community be given a formal set of criteria on how this is going to be evaluated and on what criteria for deciding to proceed or not. Because I think everybody, whatever our feelings pro or con about these issues are, we all want the pilot itself to be robust and objective and credible and transparent. So there's no reason not to I think, devote more attention to this than has been the case so far. Arguably, and I came to a prior meeting, and again, thank you very much for the opportunity for the community to speak on this. There was a recent smaller meeting at the Senior Center, and somewhere between 99 and 100% of the much smaller group of seniors that spoke were negative, from mildly to very much. And so arguably, a metric like 50,000 rides is very impressive, but on some measures, by the lights of many of the speakers here and at that other session, 100,000 or 200,000 rides would make the problem or the negative double or quadruple what it already is being perceived as. It's the sheer volume and the revenue as well. It's a positive from one sense, but it's also possibly a negative. There's also and I guess in the course of a pilot, you learn things that you're not anticipating, and it stands to reason that you don't have rigid criteria at the beginning, that you can adjust as things go and develop additional criteria or adjusted criteria in the course of the pilot. So that of course makes perfect sense. There's another method I think that's widely accepted that I'm just going to throw out a couple of thoughts about, and that as far as determining at the end of a pilot whether to proceed, and it's not just data or metrics, it's receiving a certification or an assurance from some kind of a body that has a reason not only to be a stakeholder but to be knowledgeable about the issues or the success or the failure of the pilot. And in this case, for example, I would suggest that the police department certify to the Board of Selectmen or whoever is the final decision maker, they certify that they have the resources and the capability to manage going forward, even if it's not perfectly under control at the end of the pilot, to manage going forward the major issues. Sidewalks, as far as Brookline being an age-friendly city. To me, that should be number one, and I think you reported some interesting data that the number one complaint so far is the sidewalk issue. Another type of certification like that, which I would throw out for you to consider, because Brookline is so proud of being an age-friendly city, that the Brookline Community Aging Network at the end of the pilot officially certify that they're sufficiently comfortable that the resources and the ability to control the scooters on sidewalks are such that they are willing to see it become a permanent fixture. So that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Kathy?
Yeah, hi. Hi, I'm Kathy Lola. I live at 43 Columbia Street. I'm town meeting member, Precinct 9. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front. I'm speaking for myself. So I'm 58. I'm of the demographic that most of the commentators have been this evening. I think it's a real problem because I think the people who are under 40, under 30 are not being represented, and that's a significant issue because many people here are making all kinds of assumptions that may or may not be correct. The issue of joyrides, I think, is facetious. People have to pay for rides. They're not going to be paying, $5 for a joyride when they're 22. They're using these things to get to the T, to get to work, to get to friends. I used it to get to Landry's, to get my bike, because I'm an avid bike rider. I bike day and night. I bike in the rain. I bike to Russo's on an e-bike around town. Otherwise, I ride my regular bike. It is the future. It's what we have to do. We have to get away from cars. And I think this town is backwards when it comes to an absence of bike lanes and protected lanes. If we had protected lanes, people wouldn't be on sidewalks. I agree that the e-scooters should not be on sidewalks. It is dangerous for the elderly. I understand that people don't want to feel threatened by these things because they're fast. But we need protected bike lanes. And we need the police to enforce automobile laws. Every single day I ride down Harvard Street. Every single day there's a car running a red light in front of a school where the policeman is obligated to protect the children rather than go after the car that just ran the red light. Every single day there are cars double parked in the bike lanes in front of Brookline Booksmith. There are delivery trucks. That whole corridor has bike lanes that are not protected, and there's no point in having them. I am not safe riding my bike. Yet I would rather ride my bike than ride a car. We have one car for a family of 5. 2 of my 3 children are over 20. They have both ridden the Lime scooters. They do so in order to avoid using a car. So, young people are avoiding using cars. They're trying to do the right thing. Okay, there's a couple more things I wanted to say. In terms of technology not being ready for prime time, I can't imagine how the technology would change. What will change is protected bike lanes. Okay. Oh, in terms of education, the one ride I took on Lime, first of all, they ask for your driver's license. So they have an image of the driver's license before you can use a scooter, so they know that I'm over 18. So if there are people riding under the age of 18, there must be something problematic in how they got that scooter. And they do go through an educational piece on the Lime scooters that I had to scroll through all these things about helmets and where to park and so on and so forth. So I do think that there's going to need to be a lot more about education and enforcement in Brookline. But Lime is certainly doing their job. Is that it? I think that's about it. So thank you for your time, and I really appreciate your sitting up here all evening. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Liz Linder. And then after Liz, Colleen Reynolds, and then a Renee Holz. Thank you.
My name is Liz Linder. I'm in Precinct 4, a resident and a business owner, and I didn't know that I was going to have so much to say about scooters until you sent an email asking me to show up. So my first, I've just been taking notes, listening the whole time, and my first impression of the scooters was, oh, that's so wonderful, so exciting. I used to ride my nephew's scooter, and I felt like I was too big for it, but boy, is it fun when you go fast. So I'm not necessarily anti-scooter, but in an area that's so pedestrian friendly, I have to say that it's been making me nervous lately, and I'm pretty active. I'm mostly a pedestrian these days because everyone's on their cell phone in a motor vehicle, and a scooter is a motor vehicle. I have seen scooters, the people that I've observed using scooters are the ones that annoy me, not the ones that don't annoy me, because they've left scooters in front of my door, like I cannot open the door without knocking over a scooter. It's, they just seem a little oblivious. I'm also, by the way, right above the new dispensary, and so maybe there's a connection there. Not that I have anything against edibles. I'm just going to read some notes. The thing about this being green, I'd like to understand how it's more green than walking or riding a bicycle, which actually uses the body. So I think scooters are better suited for people who have mobility issues than people who don't, in that, isn't it better to be active and use your feet or a bicycle and focus on one transportation issue? Maybe it's because there are no laws around scooter use. Maybe that's why I'm finding myself so irritated by them, but I feel like it was false advertising. What seemed like such a beautiful device has come to be a nuisance. They are motorized vehicles. There should be some insurance that coincides with the use of scooters that the companies are paying. There should be, it seems to me, an accident waiting to happen. Just one person who's, fragile, getting knocked over, could end up in a hospital, and that's sort of the beginning of the end. I mean, I'm concerned a little bit about, the citizens that might be living next to me in this possible senior housing project. And it doesn't, I'm all for micromobility. I like that term. I never heard it before. But, and I'm definitely for, using smaller vehicles to get around than cars, but it doesn't seem to me that I'd be interested to know what the demographics are about the people who are using the scooters if they're really replacing cars for the most part. I'm seeing a lot of teenagers, gangs of teenagers, people riding on sidewalks fast, in the congested areas of the village and Coolidge Corner, et cetera, and it just seems like, it strikes me as a liability more than a solution. So if there were, do we need a separate scooter lane then? What about, like a motorized skateboard lanes? It just seems like there's so many micro-mobility solutions, but if you have a scooter, maybe it should be your own, and is it motorized? Do you need a license to operate it in that case? I also wanted to add a couple of other things before you hold your sign up. The list of cities that have banned scooters, to me, are interesting cities and very pedestrian-friendly cities that I like to think I'm, in a like-minded city. Bill Schechter was asking questions about unintended consequences and the fact that we just need to be asking a lot of questions. And I caught him on the way out, and he said, would you just also note that, motorized vehicles are prohibited from the Muddy River and other areas, but why aren't scooters? I can see exceptions for people with mobility issues, absolutely. I love the idea of that. I've also seen occasionally an elderly person or a disabled person driving in the middle of the road on a scooter, which is like, oh my God, I'm just waiting for a car to make a wrong turn. It just seems so upsetting. I'm less concerned about the helmets. Thank you. I'm less concerned about the helmets in that, as a scooter rider, that's your responsibility. I feel like the scooters are actually more dangerous to people who didn't sign up for them. So if you sign up for them and you want to take a chance, great. Although that does tax maybe, if accidents are taxing the medical system, that's all taxing us. So a couple more things in my 30 seconds. For me, this is really about accountability and having a system of accountability for any company that's profiting from this, including neighborhood impact fees and insurance, like a serious liability insurance package. Let's see. I think the information needs to be front and center on the scooters. Maybe they're, let's say they're misparked. Maybe an alarm should go off. Maybe there should be a very, very clear number on who to call, and somebody from the company needs to show up in, less than 10 minutes. Maybe they're blocking someone from getting to a hospital who needs to access a handicap ramp. And my final thing is that nobody's really mentioned this, and maybe this is just an issue with everything, but I'm interested in the trackability and the data mining that's going on with scooters. They're smart objects. They're objects that we're introducing into the city. Who's managing the data that they're collecting, and how much access do we have to most of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Colleen, Renee, and then Bob Miller after that.
Hi, I'm Colleen Reynolds. I live at Longwood in St. Paul, and I'm 24, so I'm part of that demographic that didn't show up here and that seems to have a bit of disdain when referencing to my age range in this room. But I'm an avid fan of these scooters. I mostly walk everywhere most of the time, but there are times when I'm running late or something's too far, and normally I would call an Uber or I would call a Lyft, but I can now use scooters. So I am using them to replace a car. And when I'm taking a scooter instead of a car, that means that there's less pollution in the air, there's less wear and tear on the road, there's less traffic. And me going 15 miles an hour on a scooter is a lot less likely to kill a pedestrian than a car that can go 50, 60 in certain areas. So I really think that these are a better mode of transportation and one that we should encourage. But what I really think is important to say is that when cars were first introduced, they were demonized across the world. Lots of places, including cities like London, which we're all talking about how we aspire to be like other cities, introduced laws to prevent them and ban them. People talked about their health implications and their dangers, but we've built our world around them. Now, even though we all have all these fears and concerns, which many are legitimate, our solution shouldn't just be to demonize this new mode of transportation, it's to build our world around it. This is the future. This is a more green technology than cars, and for the sake of our planet, for the sake of having more accessibility for people in my generation who don't want to own cars, this is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Renee? Then Bob. Bob, you're up after.
Hi. I'll be brief. I came in late because I thought there was a different meeting going on. The first month that the pilot program started, I was on Harvard. I was waiting for the bus, and I saw a student-aged young man almost get killed. Almost get killed because he was on a scooter and he was messing around and he hit a pothole. He went flying. He almost got hit by a car. The scooter, it was a bird, broke in half. I don't know how, he didn't hit his head. He obviously wasn't wearing a helmet. And then he got up and he was staggering around, and they picked up the scooter and tossed it, and then he and his friends just walked away. They were laughing about it because, I don't know. I'm wondering how and if accidents are tracked, if that's something that you'll be able to pull into the data that you're getting. This young man was not going to go, I don't think, to a hospital or anything. He was just kind of in shock from what I could tell, and he was just like walking it off with his friends. So that's a question I have. I live at 99 Kent Street, which is at the end of Kent Street. That's right near Brookline Village. So I see a lot. The building I live in is elderly and disabled. Constantly seeing people flying by on the sidewalk as well as on the street, but a lot on the sidewalk. A lot of them are underage. They're teenagers, are high school age, they're not college age. And a few days ago this week, there were a couple of them whizzing by right in front of the building on the sidewalk, and this girl was screaming, "I'm going to fall off," as she's whizzing by. The people that I live with, a number of them asked that I come and say something. I didn't realize there'd be so many people here who would also talk about problems with people just using the sidewalk. I've said things to people about, don't ride on the sidewalk, please. And again, the blank stare, complete whatever. It was interesting to hear that other people noticed more than one person on a scooter. I don't know if this is a thing now. But I actually saw a father with his little child balanced at the front of the scooter. So I'm wondering what happens next. Next we'll have dogs on the shoulders, and I don't know. I don't, I know this is anecdotal, but this is truth. What I see, what people are doing and not doing. And I don't think it's facetious or anything. This is just what's happening. I think that this town is not set up at this point, being a pedestrian-friendly town, for this particular program the way it is now. I think it needs a lot more time to develop the whole scooter business. And, I'm glad that there are people who enjoy using it for transportation, but from what I'm seeing, it's not necessarily the majority, So that's all I have to say, and see the rest of my time.
Great, thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
Bob, you are up. And then that is the conclusion of the people who have signed up. So anyone else that wants to make a remark, you can come towards the podium. I will be here for as long as it takes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Bob Miller. I live on Copley Street. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 8, and I teach 6th and 7th grade at the Heath School. So first of all, I would totally agree with a lot of the things that have been said here tonight. People park scooters in really inappropriate places. People ride scooters maybe in inappropriate ways in inappropriate places. And by the way, as far as the parking, I have been known on quite a number of occasions to pick up a piece of trash that I did not throw on the ground. I would encourage us to also move a scooter that is blocking a sidewalk or blocking a handicapped ramp. You can do that. Alarms do not go off. As good citizens, I think that's something we should do. North Brookline is an urban area. A lot of people move here because of the idea that they can get around without having to drive a car. And I know that that's true for me. Most of the time I'm riding a bicycle, but I am a pedestrian here, and I'm also a car driver here as well. I wanted to just mention, somebody had earlier, it seems like a couple people mentioned like these are suited for rural areas. That's totally not true. I would not expect to be riding 10 miles on a 50-mile-per-hour road on a scooter, but I would expect to be able to ride in Cambridge or Brookline or Boston on a scooter. So these are, and I was going to go through the list of places where they are, but I don't think that's necessary. I also wanted to mention that times have changed. My children, who are 26 and 28 years old, most of their friends do not own cars and never have. My son does not own a car and never has. He's 28. And I think the young woman who spoke earlier does represent a growing trend. As somebody who's bicycled my entire life as primary means of transportation, I can tell you there are more bicycle riders this year than there were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. People are riding in the rain. People are riding all year long. And this is going to continue because the young people are not going to be driving cars the way my generation did. You know, they're not counting the days until they can get their driver's licenses. So more bicycles are being used as alternatives than ever before. More other means of transportation are being used than ever before. We do know that the Green Line is overburdened, and you know, I understand there are some new train cars coming that are going to help, but there's no reason not to provide people with other alternatives. And I would suggest that the reason you see a lot of scooters in Coolidge Corner is because people are going to get off in Coolidge Corner and then may live a mile away and not have the time or the ability to walk, and that's a way for them to get home. You know, I guess the last thing that I want to say, well, change is hard. And I've noticed that in Brookline, the idea of giving up one parking space brings out huge numbers of people who are just totally like flummoxed with the idea that we don't have enough parking. How can we give up a parking space? And the answer to that is that we have a lot of people who don't want to drive a car. If you give them a way to ride safely, they'll do that. And I'm talking mostly about bicycles, but I'm talking about scooters too. And I'm very excited that there are so many people here that are concerned about safety of pedestrians. And let's give people who don't want to take cars places a way to get from place to place without riding on the sidewalk. So I'm glad there's so many people here that are going to be advocating for bike lanes. So, you know, I guess in conclusion, I would just say that, you know, Brookline loves to talk about how progressive it is, but all we need to do, and as somebody who rides a bicycle, if you ride a bicycle out of Brookline, if you go into Boston, all of a sudden you're in a protected bike lane. If you go into Cambridge, all of a sudden you're in a protected bike lane. We are way behind the times. We are fighting the inevitable. This is going to keep happening. There are going to be more and more bicycles. There are going to be more and more people doing things besides driving their cars. So we can pretend that we can stop that, or we can provide a way for people to do it safely.
Okay, anyone else inspired to come up to the podium? I see you, Arthur. And Barbara, yes. Arthur, your hand was up first.
Arthur Conquest, town meeting member, Precinct 6. You don't have to answer this question right now, but at some point, I'd like to know what the financial arrangement with these companies are, and whether or not it's going to change in any way if you sign a permanent agreement with those companies.
Sure,
You don't have to answer now.
I can respond unless
Okay.
you have.
No, go
more.
ahead.
Okay. So it was a $1,000 license fee because this is treated as a license. And then it is $1 per scooter per day when they put out a scooter. I don't have exactly how much money we've generated to date, but I can address the second part of your question, which is that I foresee this structure, this financial structure changing once we move forward.
When you say $1 a day, what does that mean?
So they're permitted 125 scooters per day. They have not put out 125 each day, but when they put out a scooter, we get $1 for that scooter per
Gotcha.
day.
That's the $1 I see on the scooter.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, Arthur? No. Okay. Barbara.
I'm Barbara Wilhelm, and I live on Freeman Street. I have a couple things to add. I actually was hit by a bicycle when I was running. This is years ago when I was a lot younger. I was on the Mass Ave bridge, and this guy came up behind me and hit me at quite a speed. And he actually pushed me into the bridge fencing. And I was there, and I could not get up. And I basically, nobody stopped, no car stopped, and I was pretty severely injured. He went on and just left me. And I was really disappointed then with humanity because I thought somebody should have stopped their car or done something. With that said, I do support what is going on here. I've lived through it. I've lived through an accident. I'm a lot older now, and every time I go to the doctor, I get asked, have you fallen? So what we're hearing here is real. I mean, there's real risk and there's real concern. But I also agree with the people who are talking about the changes. And we have to think about people who are younger. And we are smart people. We can figure this out. I do agree that the companies need to be actively involved in finding solutions here. And I would hope that they would agree with that too. The only other thing that I think is kind of new, I was thinking about the whole green part of this as I was listening. And I see these things all over the place. And I do agree that we can all move them. I agree that there's no buzzer that's going to go off if we do that. But I guess somebody tonight said, if we can dock them like the bicycles are docked, to me, that makes more sense. Because then you have them in a centralized area or areas, and you are using less fuel to go pick them up. So I would just say that I would certainly like to ride one of these things if I had the faith in myself to be able to do it. I'm not sure I am comfortable with it, but I'll tell you, getting from Brookline over to Cambridge and doing this in a car at rush hour is absolutely non-tolerable. And if I could get my confidence up, I would ride one of these things in 1 second. So thank you so much for letting us come and speak.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. Anyone else? Well, then I will conclude and just thank you very, very much for coming out. I really do take a lot of this feedback to heart. And this is hopefully the first of many conversations that we'll have. The pilot program ends November 15th, so I hope that we'll have at least 2 more meetings like this. So hope to see you at them. Okay.